Let me turn it over.
Yeah, we gotta go to I changed names for the presentation.
I know.
Two quick comments. One, if there's anyone who does not have a hat that didn't get one last night, please let me know. And two, our main task now is that of a middle reliever in baseball. We got to get to the closer. So we have a talk to give, and then Bob and Len are going to make some comments. But we're now on countdown to the important person talking. So we will try desperately to be efficient. Maybe not. Okay.
Or not.
Albert pointed out that actually this paper done in conjunction with the Converse Award, one of the many he's won, which sort of summarizes some of his work in this area up to this point. And I commend you to consider going back and finding this. Portia, did that make it on this little?
I can't remember right now. No.
It either is or is not.
Yeah, it is. That's right.
Okay.
It probably is.
Like Mike, I felt I had to have an equation. So here's the mythical equation. My take on this whole sort of choice modeling era is low tech. But what's happened is we've gradually built some kind of utility preference function that's increasingly more elaborate. Starting out with just, do you like it? And then we decompose into attributes, etc. So what I'm going to do for about 9 minutes is take you on a tour of sort of that process, getting within a generation of the modern era, and then turn it over to someone who's more modern. Okay. My first paper was the Evans and Roberts paper. Can you tell a Chevy owner from a Ford owner? And there was actual shouting at meetings about this issue. And the notion was if you measured their personality or whatever, you could tell whether somebody buy a Ford or a Chevy. The notion of low R-squared hadn't caught on at that time. And then there was the whole AIO kind of stuff, psychographics. Well, if it's not general psychology, it must be specific psychology, and now we'll be able to predict it. And then, of course, there's the famous paper with Doug Tigert and Ron Lonsdale, who I believe was your first student, correct?
That's right.
So this is the number one on the Bass list student, about individual versus aggregate behavior. My comments are going to be about predicting individual behavior. We can predict aggregate behavior. You know, we can predict the economy, but whether I can predict what Eric is going to do next is a different question. And in fact, the conclusion of the Bass Tigert Lonsdale paper, one of them, is vast majority of situations, at best a small percent of the variance in which alternative is purchased can be explained on general traits. Rough translation, the error term is pretty big. So then people said, well, we'll just ask them. Right? We'll directly ask people what they're going to do, and they'll be able to tell us. There's the famous Juster paper in the 60s out of Michigan on that issue. There's a Bass paper up to the present, Albert's work on this topic, right? And there's going to be another intention slide. My conclusion after looking at this stuff, they're still pretty unreliable. Intentions are pretty unreliable predictors. So what do? Well, let's take intentions and contort them somehow, also sometimes known as calibration, right, or rescaling. We'll contort the intentions and we'll make them confess. Don Morrison and some of his lineage are up there, having worked on that, including some of the more recent work where they've now reinvented the Heisenberg uncertainty principle in surveys of, you know, if you ask somebody about something that's going to change their behavior. Statistically significant, not a whole heck of a lot, but it is statistically significant, and over an aggregate makes a difference. And then there's, of course, the Jameson and Bass paper. This is my conclusion. I can't attribute this to the Frank. This is not elegant. But its intentions and its cousin preference are still miserable, individual level predictors of behavior. Okay. Then there's this paper. I made the mistake of defending my dissertation in May and then found out you don't get scholarship in the summer. So it had to have something to do that summer. So we ran a soft drink experiment and gave out soft drinks, basically. Frank has always found some way to get some money out of the 4As to pay for the soft drinks. And I have to admit, I purloined a few of them because with no income, that was pretty much the diet. Anyway, this is a pretty important observation he made. And I didn't make it. I didn't have a clue there was anything important in it except, free soft drinks. But he clued out that choice behavior is not constant even when attitudes are unchanging. Only about 1/2 the time did subjects actually choose the brand they said they preferred most. Well, if you ask them what they're going to do and they tell you what they're going to do, and only half the time do they actually do that, you do have a prediction problem at the individual level, which led to the theory of stochastic preference. It's interesting, I've been associated with people who have the theory. Howard had the theory of buyer behavior. This is the theory of stochastic preference. An incredibly interesting Odell Award-winning paper with a really simple latent class model. There are people who are loyal to each brand, and there are a bunch of people who are basically random amongst the brands. And then he put another stake in the ground, which is sort of interesting. All the critics need to do is show the following statement is false. There's the falsifiability tradition. Will never be possible, never is a strong word also, I think, to provide good predictions of individual consumer choice behavior for separate choice occasions. Pretty strong statement. Now, all I can say is I've tried for 30 years and I can't prove him wrong. So at this era also people started to build models of it. Instead of just saying we can't predict it, they built sort of the zero order models. Andrew Ehrenberg, obviously this vast Galland and Wright paper was an important one in this stream, a very important paper. The more recent paper with Deepak, same stream. We'll go the stochastic model route, if you will. Now, some people decided, well, maybe there's a pattern here. People can sort of learn. Now, what I finally have concluded is a lot of the stuff, including Alpin's learning model, was the researcher was learning about the probabilities of the participants more than the participants were learning or updating. But nonetheless, having some history data built in there, probably the penultimate one now is the Donnie and Little paper, with a very elegant, simple way of, well, what did they do the last time? There's another nice, simple way of modeling it. People have been trying desperately to beat that. And in the 4th decimal point of log likelihood, we can beat it. So the point is a substantial majority of customers, and this comes from Frank's words, again, so a substantial majority of consumers whose behavior may be categorized as stationary have purchase sequences for brands which are either zero-order process or something close to it. So maybe there isn't so much learning. There were a bunch of people who tried to go in this direction and look at patterns over time. Bell did a lot of really nice work. In fact, I put up that AMA Proceedings paper because there was a time in the field when in places like AMA Proceedings you actually found really good work, and Google will never get you there. I put up the Bavo paper because this is a grandson paper where he took Berline's model and said, that probability, which is pretty stable, looks like it actually increases for a while and then goes back down for a while. Sort of a neat result, but not massive movement. E was this big, now it's this big. Right? E is still pretty large. Bunch of purchase incidence models. And notice every time I put up a slide, this was not done intentionally. I ended up with a Bass paper on it.
But that was actually the part where I was going to take over then.
Yes. Sit down and shut up.
Little shouting.
Okay, purchase instance. So, look, well, mostly it's done, so I was going to do some more of the more recent work, except for actually this particular slide. And I'm sure there's a lot of names in the room here which we have not included in those slides, so I apologize for that. But we just tried to pick some and of course also point out some of Frank's work. Now, it is important when we, so here we're still looking at zero order behavior, but now rather than trying to predict the individual choice, we're looking at purchase incidents and things like penetration for a product, or things like how many times does the consumer purchase a product within a certain time period. So it is important to point out Andrew Ehrenberg's work, and all of you who have taken Frank's seminars probably remember that his story is how Andrew Ehrenberg, when he was younger, was working as an applied statistician for a marketing research company and was just looking at the data. So just graph after graph, graph after graph, looking at the data, and came up with the idea of the NBD model. And as a little sidetrack, there was actually this, later on this debate between Frank and Andrew Ehrenberg on the Generalizability Conference in Wharton. And of course the issue what came out in Marketing Science in 1995, where Andrew Ehrenberg was more like, okay, data first, theory second, and then Frank more about theory first, data second, and so a little bit different in philosophy. Okay, moving on, looking at these purchase incident models, so I think some very important contributions here by Frank and this sort of work by Bass, Jolande and Wright, and Jolande, Bass and Wright, making an extension of the NBD model, I almost said Bass model, to the multivariate case, so doing the Dirichlet model. Now, there's one thing though about the Dirichlet model, is that it does not allow for asymmetric switching, and therefore does not allow for any structure in the market. So that kind of makes a nice move to the next slide. And looking at choice models and market structure. And again, I think Frank has definitely made some important contributions in this area. One of the earlier models, the Hendry model, and so the paper by Frank and co-authors, which have looked at coming up with a theoretical explanation of it within marketing and an application of it. Another interesting paper, I think, was the Grover and Srinivasan, where they just basically said, well, we're going to divide the market into different segments. So we're going to have the loyal consumers and the switchers. And then the extension by Jane, Bass, and Chen, incorporating heterogeneity within these different segments. Thought another interesting paper by Terry Elrod, Choice Map, where they kind of combined multidimensional scaling and the brand choice decision. And so I was talking about it with Terry, and he gave me a nice example about this. He said, well, if you're looking at consumers, and there's one consumer who always purchases Diet Coke, and even though we don't incorporate this in the model will be able to pick this up and get a nice market structure based upon the switching. One of my own extensions of using this vector analytic model in a hazard framework. So after these kind of models, I think there was an important other area which started looking more at choice models and aggregate behavior. And of course, McFadden's conditional logic model had an important role in this area. But also again, the work by Frank and some of his students, where they tried to take individual level data and combine it with aggregate level data. And finally here, a classic, the Kaldani and Little paper, which was the first application of a logic model to scanner data. Now again, these are more like aggregate level models, and so the focus here, they're still zero order models, but the focus was more so on market share rather than individual choice. Now really the next step became is, well, we want to incorporate some more individual component in the model. Now maybe the logic of the loyalty measure was a first step of that. But then really became the area of heterogeneity. Let's incorporate some individual specific components within the model. And again, we see a number of papers here by Frank, who has also made some and I do have to say, there's of course a lot more earlier work also by Frank and like his students in the area of heterogeneity. But I was looking here a little bit more at the logic model. Kamakura and Russell, who started out with a latent class approach, and it's basically the idea, well, we have this underlying heterogeneity, and we can estimate this with a number of discrete mass points. This really, like had a little bit of a question or a debate about, if you have this heterogeneity, potentially highly multivariate, can you estimate this by just a few discrete mass points? And more recently, we have seen more of a focus on Bayesian modeling. And of course, well, Eric also has been doing a lot of work in this area. But I just summarized this by a book, what is forthcoming by Craig and co-authors on Bayesian modeling. I want to make a few other points about this. So, the importance of heterogeneity. If we're looking at the models, the one thing what we know that if you incorporate heterogeneity, models fit significantly better. But the question, of course, is also, what is the importance of the heterogeneity on the parameter estimates? And in a lot of the models, like the linear models, it may be more so just on parameter efficiency. But for example, in the work what I've done with Frank, where we have a nonlinear hazard model, it can actually lead to badly biased results if you do not account for the heterogeneity. So after that, it came more of a theory of a point where they started incorporating more bells and whistles maybe into the choice model. And so one area was where they started looking, well, we're going to be looking at both the brand choice and the purchase timing decision. And again, and there's of course some other papers also by Frank, which could have been included here, which are on other slides, and of course work by Deepak. And so here the focus was on a hazard model. What is the likelihood of someone making a purchase given that they have not purchased yet? And then extensions to competing risk models, where we kind of say not only the purchase, but we want to take a look at maybe saying, well, ketchup is very popular in academics, so we're going to be looking people switching from Heinz to Hans, but also from Hans to Heinz. And we can have asymmetries in the switching behavior. All right, so then some of the more recent work. And so I was looking at this actually, well, as you all know, probably know here, Frank, together actually with John Little, were nominated at some point in time for the Nobel Prize. Unfortunately, they didn't get it. So Frank told me a couple of years ago, he said, well, Peter, if I'm ever still going to get it, it's going to be for my contributions to the Bass model. So we're not going to see many contributions here in the later work by Frank, because he really has been focused on the Bass model. But, so I wanted to take a look at some, maybe a little bit, a couple of interesting areas, and saying from, well, earlier all of the work has been mostly focusing on zero-order behavior. Now what we're starting to see is more like some dynamic models, potentially taking into account some higher order behavior. Make a couple of points here, some work by Dominic's and co-authors, where they have looked now also at the longer term effect of marketing mix variables. And of course Don also has a paper in this area with co-authors. Started also becoming more important in trying to tease out the effect of both heterogeneity and state dependence, and different kinds of state dependence in models, and also potentially just instances of learning by consumers. Now, I finally want to finish it up with some research which is wrong. You'll see it when I said about structural modeling. And so, I couldn't take it out anymore now.
Dr. Bass.
But So that there's some more recent focus on this particular area, and I think more so like so we all know like okay, logit model, reduced form model, and so what we're doing with these structural models based upon theory. So I say okay, consumers are for logit model, utility maximizers, we incorporate budget constraints, and then we derive a structural equation of a structural model. And one thing what we can get out of that is different kind of measures in that where we're looking at policy implications which we cannot get out of the regular logit model. And so things like consumer welfare would be one measure, and so you can actually do some of these analysis and kind of say what is the impact of a like let's say a price promotion or a reduction in price or a change in quality on consumer welfare. There's definitely a question on whether these models really help or hinder prediction. I think there may be a little bit more about explanation, and although I think Frank had some very interesting views about these models. And here I will give the floor to Albert.
Thank you. Very pleased to be here. I'm very pleased also to give a talk for Professor Bass on the day of my birthday.
Happy birthday!
Well, I'd just maybe like to go back a little bit to diffusion models, because in fact it's very, very similar in spirit to what we've seen here, stochastic models and stochastic purchase timing. If you look at the we cannot?
No, it's not. It's not a wall.
Oh,
Pull the
sorry.
blackboard out.
No, that's a wall, right?
Oh, yeah, because I saw people doing it here. All right. No, that's all right. It's just this one. This with chalk. Okay. No, it's not.
Yeah, you can do it.
No, I saw people.
Yeah, you can.
That's why you got the
It looks like
This is like bring up the lights. I just wanted to sorry for the confusion. I gave a talk on confusion. Well, I think just want to show the relationship between diffusion models and the purchasing timing models. The standard relationship here for diffusion model is this. And if you look at this, he says, well, there is a relationship between probability to buy and proportion buyers at time t. So there is contagion. This is very straightforward, naive, very simple, maybe wrong interpretation. So this is the Bass setting. If you look at the NBD, you have E of x2 given x1. x2 is the number of purchases in time period 2 given x1 purchases in time period 1 is equal to alpha plus beta x1. So it's a linear function of the number of purchases in period 1. So it looks like there is a relationship between the number of purchases in period 2 and the number of purchases in period 1. And in fact, it's the weighted average between the mean number of purchases across the population and the number of purchases of a randomly picked person. So it gives him feeling that there is a contagion because the number of purchases of that person is a function of the purchases of all the others. So the naive person says, well, there is contagion because it's a function of the overall number of purchases of the others. Contagion. Well, this is very naive, very simple. The beta binomial is exactly the same. E of x2 given x1, k is alpha plus beta x1 is equal to W. Okay, so weighted average of the overall the probability of purchase and the number of purchases over k purchases of category last time. So all this shows that it looks like there is contagion when in fact you can explain those relationships with a compound timing model. Right? So we are revisiting Bass' interpretation of the Bass model. So we do not agree with the Bass view of his own model. Abel Geland was the first one to realize this, and he included heterogeneity and reinterpreted the Bass model in this view, saying that what determines purchase is propensity to buy, and the others as to the extent they reduce risk. In this paper, I show that you can obtain the Bass model as a mixture model, assuming shifted Gompertz individual level model combined with exponential model, and you get Bass model. No contagion, no P, no Q. Of course, there are two parameters, but no contagion. In this setting, you can apply Eric Bradlow view, because you don't need a Q contagion. Right? So, this review the whole idea of contagion imitation, but still keep the core structure of the Bass model as a valued, a very rich structure to be kept as a treasure. Open issues in choice model. Well, one issue is the parameter identification issue. Here's an illustration. Thank you. Here's an illustration. I think very little work has been done in marketing on identification of parameters. People have a lot of data, they estimate parameters, without much concern what do those numbers actually mean, are they identified. Here's an example. I have a sequence here of 0 and 1s. There are t equals 17. And if I use Abel-Geland model, inertia model, you get two things for the same price. You have probability that xt is equal to 1. This is marginal probability. This is 0.81. And the inertia factor, which is 0.58. If you assume that the marginal probability is equal to 50%, say, well, I know this is 50%, so there's only one parameter left. You get inertia factor of 0.84. Inertia is the short-term tendency to repeat purchase. So you have a very different view. There is much stronger correlation if you assume that the marginal probability is known. Okay? Second, those are real sequences of 0 and 1, the real ones. I'll take another one. If I estimate the two parameters, I get 0.61 and a minus, so it's not inertia, it's variety seeking, tendency to switch to the other alternative is minus 0.28. If I assume P of xt is equal to 1, 50%, I get zero inertia, is a zero order process. Third example, t equal 11, so I get 0.36 P of t equal 1, minus 0.58, this is the variety seeking. If I assume P of xt is equal to 1/2, I get minus 0.14. So you have two different views of the same sequence. It turns out that 1 is equal to a boy and 0 is a girl. Okay? So those are real sequences. I know people who have 16 rather than 16. Yes. With passports. It's not just talks, passports. So that's the variation of marginal probabilities. Makes sense to biologists. Would you accept that women have so different probabilities to have boys from 0.81 to 0.36? Would the biologist accept this? In marketing, we say yes, probability to buy Coke, maybe 0.81. So we have no way to assess the plausibility of these estimates. Biologists maybe have a way. What I'm trying to get to is that can we infer both brand loyalty and short-term tendency to repeat purchase from the purchase sequence only? So we get both parameters for one sequence. Some people say, well, you need very long strings. If you get, but of course women are limited. So you need very long strings, maybe you get the good numbers. But how long should the string be? So what I'm trying to get at is more work should be done thinking rather than computing. Predicting the effect of out of stocks. Two models of choice capture out of stocks adequately. Out of stocks occur quite often, and they give a lot of information about interaction between brands. between products? Do elasticities change? Are their predictions consistent with the evidence? What are the potential effects on price elasticities? Third alternative, third issue, modeling choice in typical situation in the supermarket. Most choice models seem extremely stylized. They look very complicated, but in fact they are extremely stylized. Why? There are often more than 300 UPCs on a store shelf in certain product categories. More than 300. Sometimes 200. 250 is a typical number. How can choice be modeled in a pragmatic yet realistic fashion? How can aggregation take place in a realistic situation? How can we aggregate across brands, across price ranges? Those are some of the issues that people do think about. Who is it? Huh? Oh, it does say, oh, sorry. Why does it appear here? Why does it appear here?
You spent time in France.
You spent 5 years. This is the person, third president of the United States, that Professor Bass would have liked to meet. Thomas Jefferson. Maybe we'll explain to you why. Thank you.
Thomas Jefferson has a very good quote. He believes in luck, and he finds the harder he works, the luckier he gets. Very good.
We are here as a trio. Notice we had one speaker, and then it took 2 speakers, and now we're up to 3 speakers to fill half an hour. So if anyone has a question, an intellectual question in the area, we wanted to write something on a blackboard in the spirit of the seminar, you know, insert a challenge. So that was Albert's task. Obviously, we failed. So if you'd like, we can move on.
Very sarcastic, actually. Very sarcastic.
Random
Without much structure, too.
You had the yelling part too, because Peter yelled at you to get the hell off the stage.
I said, gee, I remember the slide, but I don't know what to say about the slide. Anyone? Okay, then I think we can move to the next segment if Bob and Leonard.
I'm going to make a few observations and comments. I'm going to turn it over to Len. He's going to talk a little bit, and then he's going to turn it back over to me, and then I'll turn it back over to Len, and then we'll finally get to hear from Frank, which is the reason you're here. A couple observations, clarifications, and so on. I just learned in the hallway, I didn't know about this, I thought I would share it with everybody, but actually at the University of South Australia, they just started the Bass Ehrenberg Institute. I guess it was formally announced, what, 2 weeks ago?
Yes, it's the Bass Ehrenberg Institute for Empirical General, not for marketing science, my apologies. And it has only just moved through the university system, formally announced probably a week or 2 ago.
Well, congratulations, that's great.
Let me ask a question. It's the Bass Ehrenberg rather than the Ehrenberg Bass?
Dr. Bass, I was hoping you wouldn't be asking me that question. Much to my, in this forum, much to my embarrassment, although there's no preference, it is referred to as the Ehrenberg Bass.
Oh, that's fine.
Yep. You are such
In this
a
room, it's the
Dr.
Bass Ehrenberg. It's the Bass Ehrenberg Institute. Also, some of you know Peter Lieflang, right here, holds a chair that now is in Bass's name. It's a special honor to Frank. It was named after Frank. It's a one-time thing, is that right?
That will be announced officially at the occasion of opening the academic year. That's in September, but you have some premature information.
All right. Hopefully it was all right to announce it here. I mean, it'll be in the paper tomorrow. I'd also like to mention David was talking about the P&G jet. Is that right? Flying in.
Actually, Mike was.
Oh, Mike was talking about the P&G jet flying in and stuff. There was another jet that frequently visited the airport. It was Hugh Hefner's plane, right? Because that's where he kept the Playboy jet. So that was the kind of second thrill that we got.
That was it.
Yeah, that was it. Well, what can you say about West Lafayette? At least you UTD people were in a real city. It's also kind of interesting that when Peter presented the top 20 list, that 5 of the top 10 papers were single-authored papers, and actually 5 of the top 7 papers, citation-wise, were single-authored papers. So I don't know if you just kept the good ideas to yourself, or if we just weren't bright enough with our own ideas of what the hell went on there. But that was an observation, and the number 2 paper was actually a paper that was with BJ and Eton. And I think it had about, 300 and something sites? But, what was it?
243.
243. But, Albert mentioned this, that, if you look deeply in that, about 210 were VJ self-sites. So the reality it really doesn't get up there very high. So, but it really is appropriate in some ways to be here today. Coincidentally, as many of you know, today's Father's Day as well as Albert's birthday. So I think it's kind of, sentimental in some ways to be here with our academic father here. And in some ways, too, I'm reflecting back on the last half a day and a half or whatever it's been, there's a different BAS model that I think has pertained to a lot of us, and that's Frank's thought and philosophy about his students. And the reality is, one of the greatest things about his shop is the fact that we were all students in cohort groups. We had great people around us that pushed us in our seminars and pushed us in our interactions. And Frank was the one that made all of that happen. But I think we all have to look around the room and kind of thank one another as well in terms of what our classmates did for us. And in that spirit, Len's going to talk a little bit about the students that work with Frank.
One of the things that really struck me the past 2 days is the sort of memories of flooded back being, for all practical purposes, the senior son, although only the second PhD, but really the one who was in the profession, is the impact of the BAS network and the number of people at various times I've interacted with, or through them or through Frank, meet other people. Just looking around, when I graduated, I taught regression one summer, and Jim Ginter was in that class. I, at one point, was at the Catholic University of Leuven as a visitor, and because of that, Daniel Jensen's went to Purdue to study under Frank. I've worked a lot with Mike Hansen's, and through him, and back to Marnie, back to the Catholic University of Leuven. Albert, anytime I want a trip to Paris, I said, isn't it time for you to invite me for a talk? He's still waiting for one talk when I got on the wrong train at Paris Nord, but that's okay. And he's been very generous. And I've been a visiting scholar at MIT, do a lot to BAS's influence, and John Little, and Gary Lillian, and Glenn Urban, and Al Silk were all there at the time, and it sort of just explodes. And it's sort of like anywhere I go, there is a BAS student. If I need something, not far away, it's a BAS student. And so that there is this BAS, true BAS family that's out there. I'm going to make some more remarks later, but what I wanted to do now is perhaps, I guess first, try to show the impact in a different way. I've been trying to collect pictures of the Bass students. Some people in this audience still owe me either a picture or certainly, hopefully, a better picture. A few people have politely refused to give me a picture, like Al Wilt. I'm only assuming that he has had some kind of Michael Jackson treatment to reveal what he looks like these days. And a few people we haven't tracked down. So hopefully later, maybe some of you will help me as time goes on, track down the people we haven't found, and hopefully there'll be some more pressure here. I think people know how many Bass students and some of the big names of Bass students, but I really just want to take a couple minutes and just go through the pictures and names of these people. You may want to look in your program for the day today toward the back. There's a list of Bass students and some of their information. Lonsdale was the first, and then it went downhill a little before bouncing back. Regrettably, Wayne is deceased.
Unfortunately, I'm not.
But he has his time. This was a mug shot for Neil Beckman. Clark is retired. Wilt is retired. Duffus was going to give me a picture, but he had trouble getting back to the United States in time to send it to me. He is a student who was held up as a potential CIA agent in Haiti. Now I'm starting to think that, in fact, maybe he was a CIA agent. So that is an incredible output in itself. And did you remember most of those people?
Absolutely.
And what we've tried to do to help you remember, and I don't think Frank himself even really fully comprehends the impact that his students have had on the profession. What we've done is we've put a binder together for the students who Frank either chaired or co-chaired the dissertation, with each one having a separate page, having a brief bio sketch, so that you can see, in fact, all the accomplishments of your students.
Thank you.
For those people who are students, we have a binder. For other people, because it's unlikely to keep them, we've just made black and white versions. So I thought I'd pass some of these around. And if you're not a Bass student, you can just take a black and white version here and look over it on the plane, and then you can
I told about them.
drop it off or not. If you're a Bass student, if you'll just hold up your hand, I'll put it
Yeah. Pick it up later, yeah. And all of this, we'll be putting together a CD for everyone with the photographs that you saw scrolling across the screen that were taken last night, the